What is up, everybody? Welcome to the BT Podcast, hosted by BT Church. Thanks for hanging out with us. My name is Danny. I'm your host. And however you're tuning in, maybe it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, so excited that you are here. It's going to be a fun conversation today. And my challenge to you, if you love it, tweet about it, post it, share it with all your friends. Let us know what you think. And we're excited about having today's conversation. We have special guest Grant Skeldon, Next Gen Director of QIdeas out in Nashville. Grant, say what's up to everybody, man.
What to do?
Man, so pumped to have you here. This weekend, Grant's hanging out with us with our young adult ministry, and they're just going to be pouring into our students this weekend. And it's going to be a fun time of just having a conference. But right now, we're going to get into just a special and really, I think, important conversation when it comes to young adults, to young leaders, to young believers. And the focus of today's episode is looking at lies that young leaders often face or young leaders often hear, often have to wrestle with. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we kind of get into that, one thing I admire about you is that you often seek out young leaders, young Christians who are not specifically even within the church, but within different businesses or organizations, living out their faith in those areas. And so I would love for you to kind of start off by telling us ways that you're seeing God move in the lives of young leaders.
Probably the biggest way is Gen Z. I feel like we both got to attend the Q conference in Nashville in April, and I feel like our parents' generation kind of tried to make church appealing to those outside of the church.
Right, yeah.
And it can sometimes, though, come off as like, how do we make this a very desirable place to be? And what that made it often the shadow of that, because I think every shift in the church is usually with very good intentions and actually reaches tons of people for Christ. So I don't never want to criticize alone there's good, but there are shadows to every shift. And I think the one shadow to that seeker-sensitive movement is it could make church a little more comfortable. And I think our generation, millennials, saw how comfortable church was, and we more wanted it a cause at the center of church. And so not as comfortable. Even the pastors, a lot of young people were attracted to. When I was young, it was like David Platt, Francis Chan, Matt Chandler, Mark Driscoll. These guys were really in your face. I always say they were either shouting at you, crying, or maybe even cussing at you. They may punch you in your stomach, but you're like, man, I want to be a better man, or I want to like be something more. I want to like, God is calling me to something higher. And so I say that to say it went from comfort to this cause and this like, I want to change to. The one shadow I think to our generation is we probably try to make church, or especially being a Christian, too cool. It's like, how do we also be engaging to the world, but to the degree that it's almost like you look just like the world. And so what I am encouraged by in Gen Z is I feel like they are really turned off by this idea of you can't be just like the world and change the world. Like, what is different about you? And so there's not all, but many Gen Z leaders I'm seeing that are just old souls, and they are, I would call it almost like revivalists, like Luke Lefevre is who I interviewed, where I was just like so encouraged by his call to holiness. He's called to like, let's not see how close to culture or what can we get away with and still be a Christian, but how far can we get away from what the world deems normal and really set apart ourselves and see what happens when we truly are intimate with God. And so I'm encouraged by that. And evangelism. Our generation saw our generation leave the church. I think their generation has never known their generation in church. And so they have a little bit of a different fervor, I think, of seeing their generation come to know Christ in the gospel.
Man, that's good. I love that. And we see that calling aspect, trying to live that out. You're talking about the Gen Z now, seeing that there's this element of coolness to church. And a lot of times they just spot that out and they're like, yeah, I'm not really down for that. They're looking for more of that authenticity, so to speak. And sometimes what can happen, looking at today's topic, is in that calling, we get thrown off by that calling because whether it's lies that the world brings at us, lies that the enemy throws at us. And so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to throw out a phrase that we often maybe hear that affects the calling of a young leader or of a young adult. And then we're just going to talk about the phrase. And so here's the first one we're going to bring out. You have to make a big impact now.
Yeah, I think a lot of young people feel that urgency, especially I think the ones that feel it the most that are young singles outside of college. That year after you've just graduated college and even that 6 months before you graduate college. I think it's very stressful. You spent a lot of money, time, expectation.
Right. Yeah.
You've been thinking and praying and dreaming of what you're going to be, and you realize I'm not getting any offers, and the only opportunities I'm maybe seeing are not even remotely close to what I actually am graduating with. And there's this pressure, I think, that happens that year and then the next year, and it just keeps building every year where you're like, I've seen a lot of young people stall out where they don't figure out what that God has called them to do, nor, and worse, they put a lot of pressure on themselves as they're looking at others that are figuring it out quicker than them. And so they feel like, man, I got to do something big now. And probably the downside and faulty response is saying no to anything that isn't exactly what they want to do, where it's like, this fulfills my passion and my purpose. And I always say, like, no one gets to start in the job that is their passion and their purpose. If there was on Twitter, there was this thing a couple years ago, it was called First 7 Jobs. And it was a hashtag First 7 Jobs.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of people, normal people were doing it, but then celebrities even started doing it, where they would show what were your first 7 jobs. And it's cool when you see celebrities because you see who and what they do, whether it's a professional athlete or I remember it was like Ellen she worked at an ice cream shop, like her first thing. So you just don't see ice cream shop to well, now it's unfortunate what happened there. It's like Stephen Colbert. There was a lot of I think like there was an astronaut who did it, and it was cool to see, like, for an astronaut, none of them for the first 7 jobs would have said this guy's on the trajectory to become an astronaut.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was pretty cool because I think I think if I look at my first job, which was at Marshall's, I think everyone, even every young person should consider what was the best thing you learned actually from your first job. And I bet it has nothing to do with what you're planning to do, but there's some values and there's some principles and there's some things that can be learned from that. And I would say every season, if I could learn something from Marshall's, the next job didn't look like I was going to be doing what I'm doing today. And so my main point is that we should be evaluating what does it seem like God is trying to teach me that could be preparing me for the next season. Where we probably see that most is David and Joseph for me, where, I mean, he's a shepherd before he's a king. He's doing some things that actually then made sense of what he would do in the future. And then Joseph, his trajectory never looks like, I mean, his wasn't definitely like night and day. It wouldn't have looked like you're going to be second in charge here. You're going literally from prison to a palace. And so instead of asking, like, am I where I want to be? Because I think the biggest problem is I think we assess our days by, are we where we thought we would be by this age? I think we think about that regularly, even when we go to bed at night. It's like, man, is this where I thought I'd be in life at this age? And I just think that's the wrong question. I don't think it should be, is this where I thought I'd be? Because if you're a Christian, it's not about like where you want to be. And if you trust God and believe he's good and wants better things for you than you, the question should be, was I faithful today with what God gave me? And I think if we ask ourselves if we are where we thought we'd be, we're going to say no a lot, day after day after day. But if we ask ourselves daily, simply, was I faithful with what God gave me today?
Right, that's good.
There can be a lot more yeses, and those days do add up.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up just David as a character, because obviously what David is widely known as is killing Goliath, right? Like that's his big moment, right? And that's the big impact that he made right away type of thing. Yeah. And I often love looking at how David got to Goliath, because obviously he wasn't invited to the battle. Yeah. His dad was like, hey, can you take some wheat, some supplements, some cheese to your brothers? He had no idea who Goliath was or that Goliath was even going to be there. And then finally him getting there. And what I love looking at David's story is at that moment, he was already chosen as the next king, right? He had already been anointed, all that stuff. And I love David's response, because he could have been like, I'm not going to go do that. Like, I'm the next king. Like, you go do it, Dad, right? I'm going to send you off. You don't send me off type of thing. But he's willing to serve his brothers, and that got him to that moment. I think looking at just that, like, taking the faithful next step. And we all want the Goliath moment, right? And I think that even looking at what a big impact could mean, because, that can be in the church, that can be, in the business world, whatever that looks like. But there's that big temptation. And I guess I have just a simple follow-up question with that first lie of you have to make a big impact now. Why do you think people put that much pressure on themselves?
Why do people put pressure on themselves? I mean, I think if you look to your left and you look to your right and you see, hey, it seems like everyone else is getting to. It feels like you're getting left behind. I always say for young people, they're known for the fear of commitment. Like they don't want to commit to something. Even on Facebook, it's like you were doing an event today and you do an event, you put it on Facebook. I see events where it says 8 people said yes, maybe 20 people said no, and then it'll be like 400 said maybe. And I'm like, dude, how many people are going to come? We have no idea. It could be the 8 people and none of the maybes say yes, or it could be 200. It could be 400.
Yeah.
And our generation is just is really bad at commitment. But I always say bigger than the fear of commitment is the next generation's fear of missing out. And I think that FOMO or fear of missing out forces people sometimes, and pressures people is probably the better word, pressures young people to force their hand and do things that they probably wouldn't have done faster than God intended, faster than they need to, and before they're ready for, and they bust down doors that God has not opened. And that's an exhausting place to be, I think, because I have been there, I'm sure you have, where it's like, this is a good thing, even a God thing. I'm just busting this door down quicker than God intends. And then when you get on the other side, you have to beg God and plead God for him to bless what's on that other side. And sometimes he'll save us, but I'd way rather have it where I'm going the pace that God wants. He busts down doors often. And then when I get to a hard place on the other side of that door, I'm like, God, I didn't even want to be in this room. You opened the door to this room, so I need you to provide. And I think when he opens the door, he will provide what's on the other side.
That's good. I love that. Let's look at the second lie right here. So first one, you have to make a big impact now. Lie number 2 that we're going to talk about is you have to leave to make a difference. And by leave, I guess clarify the idea of leaving a job, leaving a city. What does that look like?
I think those are the big 2. Sometimes leave a church too. Is I got to leave my church. I definitely see it where I was like, I got to leave my job. Millennials, at least, I don't know what Gen Z is on, and we'll see that as they continue to get older and get more jobs. But millennials were on the trajectory to have 14 jobs by the age of 40. And so that's job hopping. The average young person in their 20s doesn't plan on staying at their current job more than 2 years, and
or
even that
church.
could be like there's a mentality of like, hey, if it's not doing you need to share your truth and quit,
right?
And so there's just this mentality of job hopping, and I just think if you think you need to leave to make a difference, you're always like climbing a ladder of some sort, and you're never going to get to the top of the ladder if you constantly change where you're putting that ladder. And so you might be disappointed, and even worse when you're like, oh, these guys are getting higher on the ladder. Show me someone who's getting higher on a ladder. I'll tell you someone who's like being consistent with where they're placing that ladder. You're not going to keep getting to start over and then think, oh, they're just going to like put you on an elevator instead. You have to climb that ladder. And so I just think a lot of this pressure of we got to leave. I actually am really big on this. I think that you should not leave the church you're at. You should not leave the city you're at. You should not leave the job you're at until, and ideally, you've made such a big impact there and contribution there that it would actually be significantly felt if you left. To me, that's when like you truly are giving a big deal of who you are there. And God calls us to leave sometimes, and God transitions us sometimes. Like the Bible is a lot of transitions and people saying, hey, I want you to go here instead. So it's not like leaving is bad. I just think if you leave and it really doesn't change things, it only actually hurts things. It's a sign of how involved were you actually in like the solution, as well as that's just mostly for work. I also want to say for city, because when you're not from a really, really cool city, I found when a lot of people wanted to plant churches, that was kind of the world I was in. Everyone wanted to plant churches in really cool cities. I almost never saw anyone that wanted to plant churches in cities no one has ever heard of. And I was like, man, God must be hipster or something, because dude, he only calls people to cool cities.
Right, and coffee shops.
Yeah. So I was just like, I think, what if, I don't know if have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
I haven't. I'm ashamed to say that because that's like a classic.
Yeah, and it's an old school movie, but that is a movie about a young guy who can't wait to get out of his city. He hates the small town he grew up in, but he's forced to stay because of certain circumstances. And he actually gets the wish to see what happens if he was never born. That's like the big pivotal point of like he gets to see what happens if he was never born, and his entire city is impacted in a very negative way. And he comes back after seeing how much his life actually mattered, and he's so excited, even though he's actually coming back to the very not great circumstances. That's why he made the wish, where I don't wish I was never born. Like, his life feels so bad, but now he's excited because he's like, man, I have made a huge difference, even though it seems like all my friends have moved on and done big and greater things. And so I've actually always thought I want to be like a George Bailey enthusiast, which is the main character, which is I want to commit to wherever I am, I'm all in. I just moved from my city, and I thought I'd be there for the rest of my life, but I did feel like God had called me to Nashville. But I do know I made a contribution and still get to make a contribution to Dallas, where I was from. And so I think plant really, really deep roots, and God's going to show favor on people that do that.
Yeah, I read, I think it was a book called On Pastoring by H.P. Charles.
Nice.
And he made this statement. He said, pastors often try pastoring 3 churches at one time. The church that they used to be at, the church that they're currently at, and the church they want to be at. And that statement always just kind of like, it just always like kind of woke me up a little bit. And I know that this statement, this slide that you have to leave to make a difference, it's huge where we are here in South Texas, because even growing up here in high school, and this might be true for anybody who grows up in any town, is that you can't wait to leave that town.
Yeah.
And I heard that, 1, when I was in high school, 2, when I was in student ministry, just students waiting to get out of McAllen, waiting to get out of the valley, wanting to move north, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, anywhere north. And so, but then I think what happens there is, especially for believers, is the desire to leave often has them miss out on the call they have here right now. They got it. Like, God has them in that school. God has them here for a season. And yeah, like you said, if you feel God calling you to leave, there's nothing wrong with that. But what are you doing right now, type of thing. And I think about the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4, that she was obviously going through her difficult story, her difficult situation, but yet as she encountered Jesus, as she accepted Jesus, then she went back to her very town to tell people about Jesus. And we saw the impact that made. And so I think there's that tension that people wrestle with of, you leave, or what are you doing with where you, like, the time you have right now? I think is huge. And I
want to ask a quick question. I want to see if this, I might be totally off on this. When you think of the city, or a small town, because I don't even think it's really a big city, but the town of Waco, what do you think of?
I see it as a bigger town. One, because it's like as a gigantic.
It's not Dallas,
right? It's not Dallas for sure, but it's big.
So what do you think of when you think of Waco?
I mean, I think I think of coffee shops, Bible studies, and Christians, and so it's a extremely populated area of Bible Belt people when I think of Waco.
When I think of Waco, I mean Baylor is what I'm going to think of.
Right.
I'm going to think of Chip and Joanna Gaines. Those are really the big 2. I might think of JP and Harris Creek. But I think Chip, most of the world in America especially, I think would think Chip and Joanna Gaines. That is, if you ask people across the country, people in Texas, maybe they know a little more of the Texas stuff there.
Correct, yeah.
But for people in Alaska, I think they'd say Chip and Joanna Gaines. That's like the only reason they even know about Waco is because of Chip and Joanna Gaines. And I just think that's a great modern day example of 2 people that people come to Dallas at least all the time, and they're like, hey, we're going to take 1 day trip though and get away, where they'll stay with us, and I'd say 1 out of 4, maybe 2 out of 4, where it's like, we're going to go down to Waco.
Right.
And it's totally because they've
Magnolia
seen stuff
Market.
on Magnolia for Chip and Joanna Gaines. I'm like, they have truly redeemed their city by staying, and they have invested time, invested money, very unique creative ideas. I think like they are shifting the trajectory of a whole entire community and city on a national level because they stayed, even though it would make a little more sense probably, especially with their connection to TV, to be in LA than to be in Waco. Those connecting flights can't be fun.
Right. Yeah, it's
like there's no connecting flight from Waco probably to many places they want to be.
I love that. All right, let's look at this next one. Everyone else is farther along than you are. Hash that out for us.
Yeah, and I think I kind of spoke on that. Is just our compass should not be, am I where I thought I'd be? It definitely should not be, am I where this other person is? Who cares? Like, who? You think God cares? You think, like, you should not care. Why do you care? Our measuring stick is not, are we where others are? The Ephesians 4:1 says, walk in a manner worthy of the calling in which you have been called. And I think a lot of us actually don't even try to walk in a manner. We try to run in a manner worthy of the calling someone else has been called in. And we waste a lot of time, I think, trying to be good at something we're not even called to be good at, like a certain gift, to be in certain circles that God's not called us to be in. I just think a lot of Christians waste a lot of good time doing even good things that aren't just the good things God's called them to do. And it doesn't mean good things don't come out of it. I just think it's just not. There's a difference when you're walking in a calling walking in a manner worthy of calling God's called you in. That there's also a type of favor and blessing and God opening doors, God speeding up the pace. Like we talk about waiting on the Lord and how slow God can be sometimes. But I've found when you are in the center of this is what your calling is and the gifting I want you to sharpen, I've seen God open doors really fast and push people into places where like, man, I don't know if I'm ready to do this. I personally think if you're not asking yourself regularly, how did I end up here? Then you're not doing it right. Like that's where I feel like I'm in the center of God's will, where I'm like, I wouldn't have intentionally, strategically gotten to this place. I don't even know how I kind of got here, but I can trace it back and I see God's fingerprints a lot. But if you're like strategizing, because you're like, this is what my friend did, and they bought followers this way, and then they did this, and they start going to these meetings and networking and all this, and I'm a dude that's connected. Like it's a very thin line of like, how do I just, I don't know, like how do I not strive? If you feel like you are striving instead of walking in a manner worthy than calling you've been called, then that's just so exhausting. And I think it's so relieving. Like the easy yoke that God talks about, I don't think a lot of Christian leaders even know that feeling because they're pushing or putting pressure on them that's not even on them. It's for someone else, and they like the benefits of that job or that lifestyle or whatever it looks like. And so that would be the lie. And the truth is just, literally walk in a manner worthy of the calling, and God will, I think, open the doors and provide the rest.
And I feel like that applies directly to the first one of making the big impact now, because we are looking at people, and I think obviously social media is a big one here, because then we follow certain people and we see like, man, when they post a picture or video or a Devo online, like, and they get 300,000 views, and when I post it, I get 30 views, and then we start comparing and contrasting, which that's actually similar to what we talked about in the very first episode of the podcast, of that temptation of comparing yourself to somebody else. And I think a simple solution is, to me, that this is something that benefited me, because I think we all fall in that we want to be where someone else is type of thing, that pressure to perform, I guess. It's just be careful who you follow on social media, and if it's somebody that like if you're trying to get to that person's level, maybe just unfollow that person, just because like you shouldn't be striving to be that person. Like you said, it's striving to be one with Jesus and like Jesus type of thing. And sometimes he has us where he has us, and that's being okay with that. I think is such a good kind of feeling of the soul for us as we walk in this life. And so, and you think about social media, obviously the people that you follow are probably farther along than you are. And so maybe just for a season, either get off or unfollow, whatever you need to do to kind of really feed your soul in a very, Christ-like way. Yeah. Everyone else farther along than you are. Lie number 4, I think is our last one we're talking about today, is this. Is God has forgotten about you, so forget about him. How's that off for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's just something we're seeing a lot of deconstruction and young people feeling like, how relevant is God to my everyday life? And
have you ever looked up how many views the hashtag ex-evangelical has on TikTok? It's like 300 million views, like just like videos with that hashtag. Deconstruction is like 70 million, so it's still a lot. Yeah. But
ex-evangelical.
Yeah.
I have to check it out.
Check it out. It's insane.
But I just feel like I think part of this reason, I was talking to a guy in Nashville 2 weeks ago. He's in a Bible study. He just started coming, and he's apparently does really well at music and songwriting. And I was asking what church he goes to. He says that he's not in church, but he just started going to this Bible study. And I asked, well, what kind of pushed you away from church? And he said, I had just been so faithful when I was in high school and in college. And then when I got here to Nashville, I just feel like God didn't help me in a lot of ways, and certain bad things started happening to me. And I do think he needed someone who could be compassionate and walk alongside him, because he was hurting. But it did seem like it was, the way he talked about it made it seem like God had not been a like door opener and like genie almost to do like, hey,
things that he wanted to
since
see.
he didn't do this is what I wanted to do, and he didn't open the doors for that, he's not here for me.
Yeah.
And I just, part of it is us feeling like God exists for us,
Right.
And we don't exist because of him and for him. And that's just like poor preaching or theology that I believe he maybe had, is like, this may be hard if people don't like it today, is like, his truth trumps our truth,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then two, I think that, just the idea that I think the what is it? The American dream has really blended in with the gospel. So that's part of why, is like, this is my American dream and my just what I really wanted to accomplish, and he didn't open the doors for that. And I feel like. I don't think God's abandoned a lot of people. I think a lot of people think God is supposed to play a certain role that he's not supposed to play. And when he doesn't play that role, they feel abandoned. But it's not because God's like not there. It's just God is not existing for your purpose. Actually, this is probably something I say is, you know how like when we were growing up as Christians, I always felt like the thing I heard that was so negative is the prosperity gospel.
Right.
And these prosperity gospel preachers. I actually am starting to think that those guys I'm not really that worried about, and I don't even think that. Basically, I think what we have more in our generation is not prosperity gospel preachers. I would call them like purpose gospel preachers. And I would say, how are you going to convince a generation that doesn't even care about money as much, and they more care about a cause or changing the world? Like, literally, statistically, Business Journal found that the younger generation is not motivated by money or raises. It doesn't motivate them like it used to. They want to make a difference in their job or see the value or the impact they're making. And so I think the enemy's done a really good job of like, well, let's get pastors to not preach about how God is a means to prosperity, but God is a means to your purpose. And when he doesn't fulfill your purpose,
Right.
then he's abandoned you, I guess. So he's simply like a stepping stone, instead of to money, but to purpose. And I just think he has not abandoned us. We abandoned him. Like, he's just a means to our mission and our name even.
Yeah. Two things came up when, as you said all that, and really looking at this lie of God has forgotten about us, so we should just forget about him. One is Paul in Philippians. I've learned the secret to being content, and that's in any circumstance. You know, obviously he's literally writing that from a prison cell type of thing. But then I look at the book of Judges and the call of Gideon. You know, Gideon is hiding from the Midianites. And then the angel comes to speak to him, and he says, "The Lord is with you." And Gideon's like, what do you mean? Like, how? Like, look around. Like obviously God is not with us. That this God has forgotten about us. And then God speaks to him and says, "Go, you're going to do this, for I will be with you," type of thing. And I love looking at that in the midst of the circumstances around us, God reminds Gideon that, hey, I'm with you. And we get that reminder from Jesus too, you know, that you go and make disciples of all nations, for I will be with you always, type of thing. And I think that, like you just mentioned, but allowing the circumstances surrounding us to affect our worship and our belief of God is a very just real thing that we're seeing all over. Like, if we see the deconstruction happening of the faith, and so, which is insane to even look at that. But also just understanding that when we worship God based on circumstances, whether it's good circumstances or bad circumstances, sometimes when life is bad, that's the only time we seek God. And when we worship God in either one of those, it's not going to be sustainable in our relationship with him. And so it's that learning the secret of being content. That way, no matter what happens, whether our plans aren't set forth, we believe that God has, obviously a different plan for us, type of thing. But it's also just trusting and desiring to have that relationship with him, most importantly. And so God has forgotten about you. So forget about him. Hopefully, our prayer is that people believe that God has not forgotten about them, that he is with them, type of thing. And so
I'd say, man, I think you're spot on. It was like, the scorecard should not be, is God helping get you faster and closer to where you want to be?
Right.
But just, is God simply with you? Like, I love how you say, hey, and I will be with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Joseph a lot in that, because it's like, this dude had a lot of reason to forget about God. I would have felt like God forgot about me if it'd been years. I'm like, bro, all I did was wear a coat my dad gave me, and now I get put in the ground. then sold to slavery, then I get lied about, then I get put into prison. It's like, then these guys, like, it just keeps getting worse. That if there's ever a person that feels like they should forget about God, it's him. But the one thing I love about Joseph's story is it says what the phrase you just said is, it said, and God was with him.
Yeah.
And God was with him. Like
Over
in
and
all
over.
these seasons, like when he was with Potiphar, when he was in prison, it said God was with him. And I think if the scorecard can be, and not, hey, am I where I want to be? It's more, is God seem like he's with me? Which, again, you can't just like, it's not all on him. We need to want to fight for that
There's
relationship.
a personal responsibility on this,
You can't stay married and never give into that relationship, and there's only one way. Like, and God will do more work than we will ever do. But I just think, God is with us. God is with you. I think that's a great place to close it. But I think, God has not forgotten about a lot of us, but we have. Lastly, I want to say too is life is not supposed to be easy. Like, it's not like we're following a God and Jesus that then became king easily. He literally got tortured, and this is a God who said there will be suffering, and like you will be a lamb among wolves. Like, there's so many things that make it not an attractive thing. Like, everyone leaves him at certain points. In this world, there will be trouble, but I've overcome the world. Like, and so I don't know where the promise or the idea of if you follow him, things will be easy. But I think this generation is going to need that kind of confidence and strength to know, no, actually, it is going to be hard. We see that in the world, and let's be wise as serpents and innocent as doves in the world.
Man, Grant, thanks for taking time to be on our podcast. Love the wisdom that you shared, looking at these different lies and really combating those lies with truth. And man, appreciate you, praying for you as you continue on the ministry that God's called you to. Man, appreciate you.